welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you my wrap up for August and also for the Booktube-a-Thon, which was in August. So I'll just start with my Booktube-a-Thon books because that's the majority of what I read this month. The first book I read is The First Phone Call from Heaven by Mitch Albom. I picked this book because it has blue on the cover, which was one of the challenges of the Booktube-a-Thon. It's about a small community in Michigan where people start receiving phone calls from people they knew but have since died. Obviously the community almost immediately falls apart into a camp of believers and a camp of people who think it's a hoax. The whole event also starts attracting outsiders, people from outside the village, because the people on the phone, they're all talking about heaven and a very sort of Christian view of the afterlife, and so many Christians come to the town to kind of learn what's going on. And then obviously the whole thing also attracts a whole bunch of protesters who demand to see proof before they believe anything. Obviously I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I will tell you that it ends with a showdown and also a bit of a split message. This book didn't wow me as much as I thought it would, definitely not as much as The Timekeeper, which is the other book by Mitch Albom that I've read. I did enjoy reading it nonetheless, which is why I rated it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. There was a moment in which I thought I had it all figured out and I knew what the plot was going to be, but then it took a turn and I thought I got it wrong, but then in a roundabout way it still kind of came back to what I initially thought, so that was very, like, it kept me on the edge of the seat in that sense. It threw me a little bit, and after I finished the book I had to kind of take a moment to gather my thoughts. The second book I read in the Booktube-a-Thon is The Love Song of Miss QUEENIE HENNESY by Rachel Joyce, which is the book I read for the Book I Really Want to Read challenge. So this book is kind of the companion novel to The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which is over here. The premise of that book is a man named Harold Fry receives a letter from QUEENIE HENNESY who wants to inform him that she is terminally ill. Harold writes a letter back, and when he goes out to post it, he kind of just keeps walking. This kind of turns into the pilgrimage to see Queenie one last time, but it's also a journey of kind of self-discovery or self-reflection, and it's a very personal journey for him as well. It's not just about her. This book, The Love Song, is Queenie's side of the story. While Harold is walking across England, she lives in a clinic in Berwick-upon-Tweed. When she learns that Harold is doing this thing, that he's undertaking this pilgrimage, she starts to write a letter because there are some things in their kind of shared past that she wants to talk about. Unfortunately, I can say very little about this book without accidentally kind of ruining the plot of The Unlikely Pilgrimage, but I can say that Harold is a very unreliable narrator, as we find out, not because he's lying, but just because there is so much that he never knew, he never noticed. The Love Song is a really beautiful book, even though it deals with kind of in-your-face topics such as life and death. It's very subtle, kind of like The Unlikely Pilgrimage, which I really liked about both of these books. And if you enjoy The Unlikely Pilgrimage, I would definitely recommend this one. There's also a bit of a plot twist in the final 2 pages that took me completely by surprise, even though the clues are there and I should have known. It left me reeling, but in a good way, and I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, not because it's like the best book I ever read, but just because it left such an impression on me. The next book I read is a Dutch non-fiction book called TAAL is zeg maar echt mijn ding by Paulien Cornelisse. I picked this book to read in one go and I actually succeeded, which I was very happy about. So this is a Dutch book by a Dutch woman. I think she's a comedian. Basically it's just a collection of observations she makes about the Dutch language, and some are a bit broader, like language in general. There's very little prescriptivism in there, which basically means she's not telling you what you should be doing, but rather she's describing how things actually happen in the real world. It's very funny, very witty, and I really enjoyed it. I'd already tried reading it once before, but after a while I kind of got tired of it, like the same type of jokes over and over again, but this time I didn't have that experience at all. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, but I can't really recommend it to you unless you read Dutch and you're interested in funny language phenomena. If you meet these criteria though, definitely go read it. The next book I read is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. I picked this book because the author's last name starts with the same letter as my own last name. I didn't finish this book because it's huge. I didn't really expect to finish it, to be honest. I got to around page 300 of about 900, so I do think that's pretty good, and then I continued reading it after the Booktube-a-Thon had finished, and I read about another 200 or so pages, but I haven't really been reading it fanatically ever since. I do enjoy this book, although I do feel that at least half of it is going over my head and I definitely have to reread it at some point. But I love the Arthur legend and I love different takes on it, so that's a good thing, I guess. I was also going to read Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This was on my Booktube-a-Thon TBR as a favourite book of a friend, but I didn't get around to it. I didn't even pick it up. I probably could have finished it, I think, but that would have been at the cost of not reading The Once and Future King, or reading less of The Once and Future King, and I decided to focus on that one instead. So that's what I read and didn't read in the Booktube-a-Thon. I calculated it and I read just over 1,200 pages in a week, which I think is pretty good. I know I could have done better if I'd committed myself more, but I didn't, so yeah. In the remainder of August, I really only read one book, and that is The Winner's Curse by Mary Rutkoski. I am not sure if that's how you're supposed to pronounce her name because it makes no sense to me, but that's how everybody else is pronouncing it. So I read this book as part of the traveling book project that I mentioned in a video a while ago. I don't know when that happened. But basically it's hosted by 2 people on Tumblr, and there are 3 books that kind of are traveling through Europe. I think it's a Europe-based project. And we're all annotating the books. I was the first one to actually read this one, so there weren't any other annotations in there yet, which I think is a bit of a shame, but I'm also really excited to see what it's going to look like after it's been, you know, traveling Europe for 2 months. And I'm also really, really curious to see if other people are going to add to my annotations or make drawings or, you know, whatever they're going to do. So I'm very excited. So this book is the first in a trilogy, and it's about Kestrel, who is the daughter of a very high-ranking military man and who's living in a city that was conquered by her people 10 years ago, and they made the original inhabitants into slaves. One day Kestrel accidentally ends up at the slave auction and she sees a young man, and there is something about him that makes her bid. So she buys the young man, which is a terrible sentence to have to say, but it's a fictional book. And that's kind of the beginning of everything. This book had been on my TBR for a while, which is why I was quite happy that I got to read it for this project, but I didn't really particularly enjoy it. The writing is actually quite beautiful, and there are so many kind of metaphors and similes and metaphorical language that just works really well, which kind of took me by surprise because I'm often disappointed by bad comparisons. But the story itself, which kind of starts off quite quickly, gets so slow in the middle. I got really annoyed and I just wanted it to be over with. I also think the depiction of slavery could have been thought out a little bit more and presented a bit more carefully. I don't know obviously what's happening in the rest of the trilogy because it's very much like the first part in a trilogy, setting up for other things to come, but as a standalone, I don't really care for it much. I rated it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, so there's that. So these are the books I read in August, 4.5 books, or more like 4 1/3. It's not great, but I don't think it's terrible either. As long as I'm still ahead of my Goodreads reading goal, which I am, I think I'm fine. I'm not going to be doing a TBR for September because I've been not really in a reading slump, but more like just several reading bunks where I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I want to read, I don't really feel like reading my TBR. So I'm just gonna experiment and see what it feels like if I don't make a TBR. So that's all I have for today. I hope you liked this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye!